so just as John said, I'm the city forester for the city of Springfield, Massachusetts, and I want to thank our mayor, Dominic Sarno, for supporting me, participating in this webinar today. And I want to also thank all of you for coming to hear some of the great presenters that came before me. So hopefully I can add on to that and talk a little bit about the next phase of storm management, which is the recovery phase. After all the trees are cleaned up, well, what do you do next to try to rebuild the urban canopy and address some of the lingering issues that occur in the urban forest following a severe storm event? So for those of you who aren't familiar exactly where Springfield is, we're in the western part of Massachusetts, just north of the Connecticut border. See where that red star is. So as John said, in June of 2011, we experienced an EF3 tornado in western Massachusetts that carved a 39-mile path through western Mass, starting in the town of Westfield, jumped over the Connecticut River into Springfield, and tracked east through Munson, the smaller towns of Munson, Sturbridge, and finally ending in Charlton, Massachusetts. It caused major devastation throughout that zone. Some of the more rural areas experienced a lot of traditional rural forest damage. Here in Springfield, we experienced mostly urban tree damage, street tree damage, as well as some natural areas that had some severe damage. So what I'm going to talk about today is our four-part approach to our recovery phase following the cleanup of the storm, and kind of how we addressed these four major areas of recovery for the urban canopy. So I'm just going to start with some visuals of Springfield to give you a sense of what the storm caused and through the different phases of our recovery. So we've seen kind of already in this presentation some of these before and after photos, but here's just a few from Springfield. So again, here I'm using Google Street View, which is a great resource to kind of look back in time and view changes in the landscape on a very local level. So here we have Kipling Street intersection before the storm in 2007. Here it is immediately following the storm. So you can already see the devastation that occurred to the urban tree canopy. And so this is just a few days after the storm. Here we are a couple months after the storm. This is in October of 2011, and you can see most of the tree debris is cleaned up. People are starting to do some structure repairs, and you can see some lingering damaged trees still within the canopy. And here's a more recent photo from August of 2019. So this is after the recovery phase has been completed, several years after, and we have new trees planted, growing, and providing, a new tree canopy for the neighborhood. Here's another example of Mary Street and Arcadia Boulevard. You can see, pretty extensive tree canopy with large mature trees in that neighborhood. Here's that same intersection. You can see just complete devastation of the existing trees and some pretty significant structure damage to the homes in that area. So this is just immediately following the storm. Here we are again in October of 2011. You can see all of the tree debris is cleaned up. People are working on getting their homes repaired. You can see a lot of blue tarps. That was a common sight for several months following that storm around Springfield, until people were able to get their insurance squared away and get their roofs repaired. But you can still see, there are, most of the debris is cleaned up, but there are some in the distance there. You can see a damaged tree that still remains. The question is, what do we do with that? And here we are in August of 2019. You can see that tree was removed at this point, and there are new trees in place that are growing and providing that new tree canopy. So that just sort of exemplifies what can be done and how you can go from, just a complete scene of devastation with tree debris everywhere and streets blocked and power lines down. And over time and through effort, we can bring it back to hopefully, a better, more robust urban tree canopy for the future. And so the first section I'm going to talk about is our right-of-way canopy restoration component to our recovery phase. And the right-of-way restoration was funded through various funding sources, including city, state, and private funding. And so that's a big part of the recovery phase, is securing grants, getting the local community involved, and securing the funding to plant new trees. And so we did this through volunteer and contracted tree planting work, and we planted over 4,500 trees in the years immediately following the storm. Most of this planting took place in 2012 and 2013, and part of that 4,500 was a number of street trees, but also included some natural areas that we repopulated with seedlings. And the total end of the day cost for this portion of the recovery was just over $700,000. So it's not a cheap venture by any means. And planting trees, especially as the one you see there, at 2 and 2.5 inch caliper can get quite expensive. But at the end of the day, something needs to be done. And so if the sooner you can gather this information and get a plan in place, the better. So the second component of our canopy restoration was our private tree canopy restoration. So these were trees that were actually planted on private property. We oftentimes, especially as municipal managers, we tend to think of the urban forest strictly as the trees that we manage along the streets or in public parks. But, we have to realize that a significant component of the urban forest of any community is located on private property. So this program was specifically funded and designed to plant trees on private property in order to promote energy efficiency moving forward within the tornado zone. So the overall grant program was funded through the state Office of Energy and Environment, and it was a partnership between the Mass Department of Energy Resources, our forestry division in Springfield, Regreen Springfield, which is a nonprofit born out of the tornado, Davy Resource Group, who we brought on as a permissions contractor to plant the trees, and then Central Nurseries, who was brought on as the tree planting contractor. And this project was really exciting at the time. It was, kind of a newer concept, and we were very pleased to see the state buying into trees being used for energy, to promote energy efficiency. So part of this program was getting the word out, and we had a pretty extensive marketing campaign, which included these mail-in flyers, which we did direct mail to all eligible households within the tornado zone, and just trying to play up the energy efficiency, money-saving aspect of the tree planting to try to get as many people interested in the program and sign up as possible. And here's just the backside of that same card, just giving some more information and how to sign up for the program. So this program was sort of a whirlwind. The money was made available to us in mid-June of 2012. By the time we got all the contracts signed and the bids put out and everything back in, we were looking at planting mid-July through August of 2012, which is about the worst time of year possible to be planting trees. But sometimes, I think that's indicative of these programs and projects. When the money's available and the grants are available, you kind of have to to go with the flow and get done what you can get done when it's there, because it can often be fleeting. And these funds were available through the state to expend within the tornado zone to promote energy efficiency, and so we jumped on the chance to utilize them. There were over 450 private properties that participated in the program, so it was really a great success. One of the things that you will notice if you ever are fortunate enough to experience a severe storm like this in your neighborhood is that there, at least in Springfield, there was a very quick response by the residents of the neighborhood to get trees back in the ground. I mean, almost immediately. People, like you saw, had blue tarps on the roofs, yet they're calling our office to find out when we're going to be planting trees or how they could go buy new trees or donate money to plant trees. So it was really amazing that people, when you experience an event like that, you don't know what you have until it's gone, and people really, get a sense of what those trees did for them on a daily basis once they're gone in an event like this. So we ended up planting 1,140 trees across these 453 properties, and that total grant award was just over $500,000 at $510,000. So again, a pretty expensive program, but all of these programs are scalable, and you can certainly scale them down to any funding level that you might be able to secure. So one of the other things that was interesting that was born out of this event was the need for private property hazard tree assistance. We were starting to get calls following the storm of folks that had damaged trees on their properties, and either they were looking for advice of what to do with them, or they were looking for assistance for action on mitigating the hazard caused by these storm damaged trees. And so the city came up with a program where they allocated city funds to assist certain residents with hazard tree mitigation on their properties. Folks that had maxed out their insurance or couldn't get help through their homeowner's insurance to mitigate these trees were eligible for this program. And it was a smaller program, but there was 50 properties that participated in it, and each application came in and the trees were inspected by the city forester, and an action plan was devised, mostly based on some of the FEMA criteria that we had used for the original tornado cleanup. So we ended up through this program removing 123 trees, hazardous trees, 11 tipped stumps, and then we trimmed 23 trees, removing hazardous hangers from them. The program was mostly focused on removing hazardous, dangerous trees that were remaining on people's properties following the tornado. And there was, for this project, that the city allocated a total budget of around $80,000. So again, there's a cost to all of this, but I think as we go through the storm recovery, it's up to us as the tree professionals to show the importance of addressing these various issues. So the last component of storm management and recovery that I want to discuss is the long-term management of the survivors. This is oftentimes overlooked, where you immediately clean up the trees, you leave some trees standing, and then you move on to planting new trees, and you maybe quickly forget about those trees that you did leave standing, and the lingering issues that they may have. And this became very apparent to us over the next several years as we did tree inspections within the zone, and followed up with tree maintenance on some of the retained trees. There's definitely things you want to look out for and understand that you're saving these trees. It may be for the short term, the medium term, or you may be interested in saving them for the long term, but either way, you need to come up with a plan as to how you're going to manage these trees. And, you know, our storm, that particular storm was a tornado. We also suffered an early October snowstorm in that same year. And one of the things that was apparent of those two storms was the difference in the types of damage that can be caused by different types of storms. So that's something that you want to think about as you think about managing these survivors over the long term. You know, you may have a straight line windstorm, you know, our typical microburst or a severe thunderstorm, which you may end up with some root plate defects. If there's not a lot of crown damage, you want to make sure that you're inspecting the root plates for any heaving, and that could sometimes manifest, you know, weeks or months following the storm. Hurricane, again, you could have root plate defects, but also crown defects. Or tornado, one of the things that I particularly noticed is that we started to see a lot of these shear cracks develop, or you know, start to decay over time, particularly in the sugar maple population that we have here. Those seem to weather the storm pretty well in the canopy, but because of the movement of the storm and the type of twisting action in the storm, they developed these vertical shear cracks, which manifested themselves in decay pockets several years later. And it's my estimation that a lot of those types of defects were caused by that tornado. And then the other, you know, type of storm you want to think about is a loading event, which we had an early snowstorm. Trees were still in leaf, and again we saw shear cracks, but they tended to be more on horizontal branches and not on vertical leaders. So that was a distinct difference between the type of damage we saw with those two different storms. So you just want to be prepared, you know, for increased management of these retained trees. You know, you want to keep mature trees where you can, but just understand that they may require a more frequent inspection interval and maybe looked at more closely for some of these small defects that aren't really apparent immediately following the storm, but tend to manifest years later. So here's just a couple examples of these different types of damage that you could see. This is images from the tornado. You can see these oak trees just completely twisted off the stump. The roots held, but for the most part, but the trunks just were snapped, like someone grabbed them from the top and just twisted them. And you know, this is an extreme case of this, but you can imagine individual limbs and leaders throughout the canopy could have similar, you know, types of damage that aren't, you know, necessarily obvious from the ground. Here's an example of a horizontal shear crack in a limb during the snowstorm. This one's very obvious. You can see the limb completely split in half and it's separated. That could be a very fine crack that you can't really see from the ground, and it doesn't look like the limb is split at the time, but eventually over time that's going to decay and cause, you know, potentially a hazard down the road. So just being aware of that is key when you're managing these trees that have been retained after a storm. Finally, you're going to have trees like this, and you're going to have to ask yourself, well, what do we do with this? You know, this was one that was pruned by the debris management contractors, obviously not to ISA specifications, but, you know, what do you do with that tree? It was part of in a median strip of a neighborhood, and you know, it was a pretty, it matched the other tree on the other side, and there was two rows of these trees down the center. So it was a pin oak. We knew that. So they have a tendency to sprout epicormic branches. So we thought, well, let's retain it. It's not posing much of a hazard as it is, and let's see what it does. And just a couple of years later, this is that same tree. So, you know, it has the appearance of a very full, healthy tree to someone that may just be driving by it, but I know that that tree likely has some codominant issues. It has a lot of, you know, poor branch attachments due to the epicormic nature of the branching that has refilled the crown. But for now, I'm happy to keep that tree as it is, just knowing that, you know, it may require a more frequent inspection interval and you know, special treatment down the road. So thanks for listening. You know, if all else fails, we could always, you know, try something like this, although I'm sure many of you probably wouldn't agree with that, and myself included. But it is a pretty sculpture that I had the fortunate to see down in Washington, D.C. in the National Sculpture Garden. So, questions?